Elvis had ducked every spotlight for the weekend. No high-gloss suits, no entourage, just him and 7-year-old Lisa Marie, sharing strawberry shakes in a dusty cafe off Elvis Presley Boulevard. He savored the rare normalcy, her laughter, the clink of glass, the hum of traffic outside. Then they walked in, a pack of leathered-up bikers, swaggering through the door like they owned every mile of road. One of them, brash and belligerent, caught sight of Lisa Marie's giggle and swaggered over, voice thick with last night's whiskey. "Hey, little princess, shut your mouth. Some of us are hungover." Silence fell like a stone. Lisa Marie froze, eyes wide. Elvis felt a slow burn in his chest, not the fury of a rock star, but the fierce protectiveness of a father. He turned, every step a heartbeat, calm, controlled, deliberate. He didn't shout. He didn't snap. He simply met the biker's smirk with a low, even voice that carried the weight of a lifetime. "Son, that's the last thing you'll say to her like that." In that moment, the cafe wasn't just a backdrop, it was a battlefield of respect. And Elvis Presley, stripped of costume and crown, showed exactly who he was beneath it all. He hadn't wanted to bring her out here, away from the manic pulse of Graceland's grounds and the suffocating glare of the media. But Lisa Marie insisted. She'd heard his stories of diners in small towns, and she craved milkshakes, the soft clink of glass, the feel of scarlet vinyl booths. It was late afternoon when they slipped into the faded neon glow of the roadside cafe, tucked just off Highway 51, where the sidewalks were cracked and the sign out front seemed to sputter prayers to the sky. The bell above the door jingled as they entered. A few worn booths lined the perimeter, and in the center sat a battered counter where two old men nursed black coffee that steamed in mismatched mugs. The vinyl seats squeaked under their weight. The linoleum floor bore the scuffs of 1,000 hurried steps. Behind the counter, a waitress in a flour-dusted apron wiped a mug and glanced up, offering a tired smile. This was the moment the cameras and spotlights would never capture. The singer of stadium anthems reduced to a quiet man in jeans and a rumpled shirt, cradling his daughter's small hand. Elvis settled into a booth by the window, pulling Lisa Marie onto the red seat beside him. He signaled to the waitress for 2 chocolate malt shakes and a plate of fries. Outside, dusk pressed warm hues against the horizon. Inside, the hum of an old jukebox played something faint and bluesy no one there would recognize as his music. Lisa Marie bent forward eagerly, her dark curls swinging. "Daddy, look at the license plate on that old Chevy," she said, pointing past the window to where a dented black Impala idled. "It says Memphis or bust." She giggled, eyes bright. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "That's the spirit, kiddo." At that moment the door swung open again, and a rumble of motorcycle engines followed 4 hardened riders into the cafe. They wore heavy leather jackets, iron patches proclaiming their club allegiance. One of them, a tall man with sun-creased skin and a tangled beard, locked eyes on Lisa Marie. The girl laughed as she nudged her father. His chest tightened, but he kept his gaze on the counter and waited for the waitress to refill their glasses. Without warning, the bearded man swaggered to the table, his boots thumping on the scuffed floor. He leaned in close to Lisa Marie, the smell of old tobacco and gasoline trailing behind him. "Hey, little princess," he slurred, voice thick with cheap beer. "Shut your mouth. Some of us are hungover." Silence cracked across the room like a shot. The waitress stiffened, a plate poised midair. Even the old men at the counter set down their mugs, turning heavy eyes toward the intrusion. Lisa Marie froze, her mouth hanging open in shock, the half-filled straw trembling in the milkshake. Elvis remained seated, but every muscle in his body coiled. He watched her small shoulders slump, saw the light dim in her eyes. He stood slowly, each movement measured, controlled. The hum of anxious whispers rippled through the cafe. No one recognized him in that moment, not by his face, not by his voice. They saw only a man rising with cold purpose in his gaze. The biker straightened, misreading Elvis's stillness for weakness, and laughed, loud and raw. "What's the matter, man? You gonna do something about it?" Elvis's voice was soft, yet cut through the tension like a blade. "Son," he said, each syllable deliberate, "that's the last thing you'll say to her like that." The biker bristled as if struck. "Who the hell?" Elvis closed the gap in 2 strides. He didn't strike with fists, he didn't need to. Instead, he reached out and laid a hand on the man's shoulder, firm enough to communicate both warning and promise. Go outside, Elvis whispered, eyes never leaving the bikers. We'll settle this there. Or you apologize, right now. The biker's bravado faltered. He glanced over at his companions, whose faces had gone pale beneath their leathery tan. The cafe held its breath. The biker looked back at Lisa Marie, blinked at her tear-bright eyes, and wavered. Those 27 seconds shifted something in the room's atmosphere. What had been a place for idle chatter and the clatter of dishes became the stage for a father's unspoken vow, to protect his daughter at any cost, to remind the world that she belonged to him, and that some lines, once crossed, cannot be forgiven with words alone. Outside, the last light of day faded to inky blue. Inside, the biker swallowed, straightened, and mumbled, "I'm sorry." The single phrase hung awkwardly before he turned and stalked toward the door. Lisa Marie looked up at her father, eyes wide. He knelt beside her, brushing a finger beneath her chin. "You okay, baby?" She nodded, voice quivering. "Yeah." He rose, brushed his hands on his jeans, and returned to the booth. The waitress resumed wiping the counter, her eyes averted. The old men went back to their coffee. The jukebox hummed on. Elvis sat down, pulled Lisa Marie close, and reached for her milkshake. She took a careful sip, then looked up at him. He managed a weary grin. "You ready for those fries?" She nodded, and in that simple act, father and daughter sharing a quiet moment, he found a refuge far more precious than any stage. He stepped through the cafe door into the humid night air before Randy could protest. The hard pavement underfoot was slick from an earlier shower, and the neon haze from the diner sign cast wavering reflections across the asphalt. A small crowd, regulars, a few curious onlookers, pressed close, drawn by the sudden commotion inside. Elvis paused, letting the din fade behind him, the only sound now the distant whine of the jukebox and the slap of his own boots. Randy, chest heaving, spit tobacco juice into a puddle. "You think you're tough, pretty boy?" he snarled, rolling up the leather sleeve of his vest. Moonlight glinted off the creased chrome of his belt buckle, an angry, snarling dog motif. Elvis folded his jacket neatly over his arm and eased out of his shirt, revealing the sleeves of his soft white t-shirt. He stood there for a long moment, breath even, eyes fixed on the man who had dared insult his daughter. He wasn't the Elvis Presley the world cheered for. He was just a man now, summoned by a father's unyielding need to protect. "Come on," Elvis said, voice low but carrying. "I told you, apologize or we do this my way." He shifted his stance, left foot slightly forward, spine straight, just as Ed Parker had taught him years before. It was a simple stance, but in it lay every ounce of discipline he'd ever learned in Kenpo. Randy swung a fist at him. A wild, looping haymaker meant to smash his jaw clean off. Elvis didn't flinch. He pivoted on his heel, letting the blow whoosh past, then extended his right arm in a precise block that stopped Randy's fist at the wrist. The biker's momentum jerked him off balance. There was no flourish, no showmanship, only the crack of impact as Randy's wrist buckled under Elvis's forearm. The leather of the vest creaked, and Randy cursed, stumbling sideways. Elvis followed through, dropping his shoulder and driving Randy off his feet with a textbook hip throw. The diner's neon sign flashed pink and white across Randy's back as he hit the ground hard, a dull thud echoing in the hush that had fallen over the street. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Randy rolled once, landed on his feet, and charged again, his rage outweighing his sense. He swung another punch. Elvis blocked at the elbow, spun out, and hooked his arm around Randy's neck in a smooth sweep, bringing the biker down to the asphalt once more. Randy's knees scraped gravel, a breath of crimson bloomed on his upper lip. Elvis crouched, one knee hovering near Randy's ribs, and leaned close so Randy could smell the faint tang of his aftershave, the crisp scent of his white shirt. "I didn't come out here to hurt you," he said quietly, "but I won't tolerate you hurting her." His tone held neither triumph nor malice, only firm resolve. Randy pressed a bloodied hand to his mouth, spat again, and for a long moment stared into Elvis's calm, unwavering eyes. The roar of engines and chatter inside the cafe seemed worlds away. Here, in the damp hush of the lot, a reckoning unfolded between two men, one fighting for ego, the other fighting for something infinitely more precious. Finally, Randy exhaled through his teeth and slowly nodded, the fight draining from his shoulders. "I'm sorry," he rasped. "I didn't know." Elvis eased back and stood. He offered a hand to Randy, palms open, an invitation to dignity. Randy stared at the outstretched hand, then up at Elvis's face, and accepted. Onlookers stirred, some whispering, some shaking their heads in awe. Elvis straightened, slipped his shirt back on, and draped his jacket across his arm once more. He glanced toward the diner's window, where Lisa Marie watched with wide, concerned eyes. She stood alone in the booth, clutching her milkshake as though it were a lifeline. He turned back to Randy. "You don't talk to children like that," Elvis said softly but firmly. "And you sure as hell don't talk to women like that in front of me." Randy inhaled deeply, the roughness of gravel pressing through his jeans to his skin. He gave the faintest nod, an unspoken confession that he understood. Then, wiping blood from his mouth, he turned and stumbled away into the dark, his patched vest disappearing around the corner of the cafe. Elvis took a moment to steady himself. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind a quiet clarity. He shook out his jacket, then stepped back into the warm glow of the diner. The old men at the counter rose and clapped softly, their weathered faces illuminated by a new kind of respect. The waitress set down a fresh malt shake before Lisa Marie, who offered her father a small, grateful smile. He settled back into the booth, lowering his voice to a gentle rumble that only she could hear. "You okay, baby?" She nodded, eyes bright but unafraid. "I'm okay." He reached across the table, took her small hand in his, and in that simple touch, father to daughter, he found the solace that no roar of applause, no echo of cheering crowds had ever given him. The neon from the diner sign danced across the tabletop, and for a moment, the world outside, with its noise and expectations, felt impossibly distant. They sat together, sipping their milkshakes, sharing an unspoken bond forged in that brief night of reckoning. And while the story of a fight in a deserted street would ripple through Memphis by morning, for Elvis and his daughter, the night became something purer, a quiet testament to a father's promise, written not in words, but in action. The next morning, a humid haze clung to Beale Street as word of the showdown spread like wildfire. By sunrise, the city's radio stations crackled with whispers of "That crazy Presley brawl," and "King of Rock and Roll takes on Biker." No one had expected the quiet stranger from the casino lounge to rise so swiftly and so decisively, yet there it was, a story more striking than any scandal, Elvis Presley defending his little girl. Inside Graceland, Colonel Parker stormed into the music room, face flushed, flanked by attorneys and publicity staff. Word of potential legal action, Randy's bruised wrist, the outlaw's threatened lawsuit, had already reached them. Parker slammed a fist on the mahogany table. "This is unacceptable," he barked. "He'll be sued into oblivion, and RCA will turn on him." But Elvis, hollow-eyed from the night before, met the colonel's glare with a calm he rarely summoned. He set down his coffee and leaned forward, interlocking his fingers. "I stood up for my daughter," he said quietly, "and I'd do it again. No contracts, no cameras, no backdoor deals, just that." Silence fell. Parker's rigid posture softened for a moment into reluctant respect. The attorneys shuffled papers. The colonel cleared his throat. "I understand, son," he muttered. "But we can't afford the liability." Meanwhile, in one of the dingy back offices of the local paper, Tom Jenkins, city editor of the Memphis Chronicle, slapped his hand on the desk as the Gothic headline took shape: "King Fights Biker to Defend Daughter." He grabbed the wire report and scanned for color. A letter to the editor caught his eye, scrawled on lined notebook paper. "I'm a nurse at the Baptist Hospital on 3rd, and I saw Mr. Presley's daughter in the cafe last night. He didn't just hit that fool as a stunt, he taught my children what it means to stand up for those you love. I think that deserves more than just a headline. Sarah M." Jenkins retyped her note verbatim, feeling the room tilt with the weight of it. He assigned a reporter to track down other eyewitnesses. The waiter who had slipped Randy a beer moments before the altercation, the old couple who ducked behind their table, the teen who filmed it all on his brand new Polaroid. By lunchtime, the city was awash in testimonials, mothers applauding Elvis's fatherly ferocity, schoolteachers praising his defense of respect, even local preachers commending his moral stance. In the diner itself, the moment had become legend. As the sun climbed, crowds gathered outside, half in awe, half in curiosity, craning to see if any trace of the fight remained. Bits of torn denim littered the sidewalk, and 2 police cars idled at the curb, mostly to keep curious drivers clear of the gas pumps. Inside, Lisa Marie sat with her bounce returning, coloring in a coloring book while her father fielded a call on his private line. He listened, nodding slowly as Joe Esposito reported the latest. Randy's brother, Sheriff Lucas McGraw of Shelby County, had quietly withdrawn the complaint. His department feared public backlash more than a bruised ego. The colonel's aides had convinced him to spin the skirmish as a private family matter, requesting all press inquiries be redirected to a generic Fatherhood Matters campaign. RCA brass were drafting a statement extolling Elvis's unwavering commitment to family values. Elvis exhaled into the receiver. "Okay," he said, voice softer than before. "But let it be known, this wasn't for show. My daughter matters more than any record sale." He hung up and glanced at Lisa Marie. She was tucking a scrap of coin wrapper into her pocket, her own small token of a night she would never forget. By dusk, Graceland's grounds were calm. The bustle of crisis had faded into the distant hum of traffic. Elvis retreated to his writing desk, opened a fresh journal, and dipped a pen in ink. The page captured something new, lines about courage that came not from bravado but from love, words that would one day crystallize into a verse. "When the world turns its back, and the lights go down low, I'll stand by your side, more than the crowds could ever know." He wrote long into the night, until the candle flames wavered and guttered. Outside, a lone owl called, as if in greeting. Elvis paused, listening to the stillness. He realized that in defending his child, he had reclaimed something essential, his own heart. Even as the next day's newspapers carried Colonel Parker's carefully worded apology and promises of charity concerts, Elvis needed no public recognition. The letters and calls from support poured in, but in the deepest chambers of his mind, he heard only one truth: love, fierce, protective, unshakable, always spoke louder than any roar of the crowd. And somewhere, amidst the hush of G-Land's gardens, Lisa Marie dreamed of pink milkshakes and a father who would never let anyone dim her light. The following morning, the sun rose over Beale Street wrapped in a gauzy haze of humidity and the distant thrum of early traffic. Inside Graceland, however, the atmosphere was quiet, almost reverent. Rumors of last night's confrontation had reached the colonel's ears, and he spent the pre-dawn hours conferring with legal counsel and publicists. Elvis, on the other hand, slipped away from the commotion, seeking out the one person he knew would understand exactly what had happened, Joe Esposito. He found Joe in the back library, thumbing through an old scrapbook of newspaper clippings from his early career. Joe looked up, alarmed by the intensity in Elvis's eyes. "They're stirring up hell out there," the driver whispered. "The Chronicle's got you on page 1, 3 columns wide." Elvis nodded, red-rimmed eyes distant. "I know," he said quietly. "But that fight wasn't for them." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "It was for Lise, Joe. She needed to know I'd stand in front of anything to keep her safe." Joe closed the scrapbook and rose, placing a steadying hand on Elvis's shoulder. "She knows, boss. She saw it. And Memphis knows you're a father first." Elvis exhaled, crossing the room. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a crumpled napkin, the one he'd pressed into Randy's hand last night, scribbled with his business card and the words, "Respect her. Or better yet, don't be here at all." He flattened the napkin on the library table, smoothing its creases. "That napkin," he murmured. It made him think twice. "But now they want statements, apologies. Colonel wants me to say it was an accident." Joe sketched a wry smile. "An accident? Kicking a grown man's ass for harassing a little girl? Sure. Accidental fatherhood, too." Elvis managed a faint grin. You're right. He looked out the window across the lawn to the hedges where Lisa Marie might be playing. I need to do this on my own terms. By midday, the press conference was arranged. A small podium under the magnolia tree just beyond the porte-cochere. A handful of cameras and microphones arranged before a row of cautiously curious reporters. Colonel Parker hovered at Elvis's side, polishing each talking point until they gleamed. Elvis stared at the assembled media, his reflections shimmering in their lenses. When the session began, Parker cleared his throat and introduced his client in the most neutral terms possible. Then he stepped aside. Elvis took the microphone, the hush settling like a benediction. I know what you all saw, he began, voice calm and steady. And I know what you want me to say, that I regret it, that it should not have happened. He allowed the reporters to shift in their seats, pens poised. But the truth is, I won't apologize. A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. Because what happened wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of love. He looked down for a moment, collecting himself. My daughter was being hurt with words. If I can't defend her dignity, then I don't deserve mine. He raised the napkin, now framed in plastic and affixed to a backing card, above the podium. This, he said, voice hushed, was all she needed. A reminder that some boundaries aren't crossed, even for a laugh. And some lessons are best taught by example. He paused, scanning the faces in front of him, some incredulous, some nodding in agreement. I don't want this to become a spectacle, he continued. I don't want anyone's career ruined. I just want the people of Memphis to remember that respect isn't optional. He nodded once, sharply. Thank you. He handed the microphone back to Parker and turned away, walking with measured steps toward the house. Down the path, Lisa Marie waited, perched on the low stone wall, legs swinging. As Elvis approached, she hopped down and ran to him. He scooped her into his arms, and she hugged him fierce enough to make him smile. Behind them, Colonel Parker approached, pushing past the cluster of reporters. He cleared his throat. Son, that was reckless. We could have lost everything. Elvis set Lisa on her feet and faced the colonel squarely. No, Colonel, he said softly but firmly. We found something. He bent to whisper in Parker's ear. She found her father. And he found his strength. As the small family strolled back toward the mansion, a lone photographer captured the moment. Elvis's arm protectively around his daughter, her head tilting up to meet his, and Colonel Parker trailing behind with a troubled, yet strangely respectful expression. In that quiet aftermath, Memphis itself seemed to exhale. The fight had been more than a skirmish, it was a declaration. A father's promise etched not in words but in action. And somewhere in the hush of Graceland's gardens, two hearts beat a little steadier, forever bound by a truth too real for any spotlight to dim. When dawn broke over Memphis the morning after the press conference, the city was already abuzz. Headlines ranged from King of Rock throws down the gauntlet to Presley's public temper tantrum? But by mid-morning, somewhere between the chatter of showbiz columnists and the scuttlebutt among Graceland's staff, a more resonant question took hold: what would happen next? By mid-afternoon, Hitler's old RCA studios had turned into a makeshift radio booth. Elvis had insisted upon an unannounced live interview on WMC, Memphis's oldest station, one famous for playing the songs that made him into what he was. He arrived in a plain dark suit, no shades, no entourage, just him, Joe Esposito, and a single, well-worn cassette tape running through his pocket. Inside the small, wood-paneled control room, producer Lou D'Angelo greeted him with a nod, hesitated, then offered Elvis a coffee, black, like his suit. The engineer, a wiry man named Dave Conway, readied his boards. A handful of studio staff filtered in quietly, and soon the red on-air light blinked. On the mic, Elvis sounded measured, his Tennessee drawl coming through intimate and unvarnished. He opened with the station's favorite track, softly playing the piano intro to Don't Cry Daddy as background. Then, without fanfare, he spoke. Good afternoon, Memphis, he began, voice steady but low. This is Elvis Presley, and I want to talk to you, just you, no smoke or mirrors. He paused, allowing the silence to deepen. Last night, I let a man know that he crossed the line with my daughter. That man is free to disagree, free to file charges, he hasn't, and free to say I was wrong. But if you wonder why I did it, I won't apologize. A murmur ran through the control room. Lou leaned forward, pushing levels. Elvis continued. My daughter is 7 years old. She has the right to walk into any restaurant without fear of being belittled. I've spent my life in lights, but I'm a father first. When someone mocks her, makes her feel less than she is, that's something no amount of fame or fortune can excuse. Behind the glass, Dave flicked switches to fade in a violin underscore as Elvis wrapped up. I hit that man not out of rage, but out of necessity. To show her, once and for all, that respect isn't just a word, it's an action. I hope you'll understand. By the time the station returned to its regular programming, WMC's switchboard was jammed, calls of support from veterans who had seen their own daughters protected, single mothers grateful for a father's example, and even a handful of Randy's old acquaintances apologizing on his behalf. The word hero echoed through request lines whenever a caller asked to hear that speech again. Somewhere in the city, Randy, nursing a black eye and nursing his bruised pride, caught wind of the broadcast. Realizing it had blown open more than just a barroom brawl, he slipped quietly out of town that evening, boarding a Greyhound for points unknown. His departure ran on the late-night news as Man flees after altercation with rock star. But the real aftershock came the next morning, when WMC received a letter from a woman in Covington, not far from Memphis. She identified herself as Randy's ex-fiancée, a nurse named Carol Jennings, and asked for airtime. On live radio, the station manager read her words. I saw Randy at his lowest, but I never saw him stand up for anyone but himself. Hearing Mr. Presley speak for his daughter, it changed Randy. It reminded me there's more to being a man than swagger. God bless you for that. That simple message, delivered after Elvis had signed off, solidified what the night before had been raw and contentious. Memphis listeners, those who grew up on his songs and those who had never stood in line for his autograph, tuned in all day just to hear Carol's voice echoing down the dial. The station's ratings skyrocketed, and letters poured in. Thank you for using your voice to do what I could not, wrote one mother. You made me proud to be a father, wrote another. Back at Graceland, Elvis read the stack of clippings and translations of Carol's interview. He slipped the letter into his Bible and closed it, lips moving silently as if in prayer. Joe Esposito found him at the grand piano that evening, playing softly a new melody that carried in its chords both remorse and resolve. As the sun set on Beale Street, casting long shadows across a city forever changed by a few quiet words on the air, Elvis stepped to the window of his study, looking out over the lights. He knew the headlines tomorrow would proclaim, King of Rock delivers sermon on respect, or Presley defies public relations machine. But he didn't care about tomorrow. He cared about tonight, about the truth he had spoken and the example he had set. Because some battles, fought in secrecy over radio waves and small acts of courage, yield the deepest resonance. And in that resonance, a father's love found its voice, louder than any roar of applause. That Saturday morning, the summer sun rose over Memphis in a haze of heat and haze of memory. At the edge of town, that little roadside cafe, where 6 nights before all hell had nearly broken loose, sat quietly under its faded awning. The neon sign sputtered weakly as it awakened, coffee, pies, welcome. Inside, the rhythm of breakfast service hummed at a lull, the smell of bacon and eggs mingling with the distant scent of magnolias on a still bare breeze. Elvis and Lisa Marie slipped through the front door before the lunch rush, hand in hand. She wore her favorite sundress, sky blue with white polka dots, her dark curls tied back with a simple ribbon. He wore jeans and a light shirt, sleeves rolled up. For once, there was no need for sunglasses or entourage. This was their place, their morning. Daddy, she said, scanning the empty booth. Remember how I watched you back there? He smiled, ruffling her hair as they made their way past the counter. I remember, sugar, he replied quietly. You were as still as a church mouse. They settled into the same booth where the confrontation had spilled outside. The wood grain, scarred by cigarette burns and chipped paint, somehow looked more comforting now, settled into itself like an old friend. A waitress appeared with menus. Recognizing Lisa Marie, she offered a shy smile. "Good morning, Miss Presley. Coffee for you, sir?" He nodded. "Please." He held his daughter's hand as she ordered toast and orange juice, the normalcy of it all binding him in gratitude. They sat in silence, the cafe's mid-morning lull broken only by the distant tap of plates and the soft murmur of the jukebox in the corner playing a forgotten country tune. Elvis watched Lisa Marie as she traced the rim of her glass with a finger, the sunlight catching silver in her bracelet, the one he had given her just days ago. "I'm proud of you," he said, not turning to look at her. His voice was low, pensive, carrying the weight of a week's worth of headlines and whispers. "You were so brave." She looked up, those brown eyes wide. "You were brave too, Daddy. You made a man stop and think." He smiled, though his eyes glistened at the edges. "That's my job as your father, sugar. To stand up when it matters." The waitress returned. Elvis lifted his cup for a refill. Lisa Marie tucked her hair behind an ear as the toast arrived. They ate slowly, savoring the moment. His gaze drifted to the back door, to where an unremarkable sedan sat, engine off, a reminder that the world beyond this booth still churned with gossip and stakes he couldn't always control. He took a bite of eggs, then set down his fork. "You know," he began, leaning closer, "sometimes grown-ups forget how important these quiet places are. They think life's only measured in big lights and loud applause." She nodded, wiping her mouth with a napkin. "But I like quiet, Daddy." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small scrap of paper, the last note Randy the biker had left behind before fleeing town. On it, scrawled in jagged, looping letters, was a phrase that had stuck in Elvis's mind: "Just look past my rough edges." Elvis smoothed the paper flat on the table, sliding it toward Lisa Marie. "That's what people are sometimes. They need someone to see them as they want to be, not just as they show." She read it, brow furrowed. "Will they ever?" He covered her hand with his. "They will, when someone cares enough to point the truth out." A car door slammed outside, and the mood shifted. Elvis rose, brushing crumbs from his shirt. He walked to the window, watching the parking lot. A few curious traffic had stopped by, maybe to see if the kings still walked these floors. He ignored them, motioning for Lisa Marie to join him. Hand in hand, they stepped outside into the summer heat. The crowd gathered at the curb, whispering. Elvis held up a finger, as if to say, "Just a minute." He turned to them, familiar faces from TV, local reporters with pens poised, but said nothing. Instead, he reached into his pocket and produced a handful of $1 bills, tattered and well-loved. He walked among them, pressing the bills into hands that opened in surprise: waitresses, busboys, neighbors, anyone who happened by. No cameras flashed. The reporters lowered their lenses. He moved with the same quiet authority he had shown inside, a gentle nod, a thank you, whispered to each recipient. Lisa Marie looked up at him, awe shining in her eyes. "You're still giving, Daddy?" He knelt and hugged her. "That's who I am. If I can help you believe in kindness, that's enough." As the small crowd dispersed, the cafe owner came out, tears in his eyes, offering Elvis the keys to his place, an earnest gesture to repay the generosity shown inside days earlier. Elvis shook his head. "Keep it here. I just wanted you to know your daughter is safe in this town." He and Lisa Marie climbed into the Cadillac. As the engine rumbled to life, she waved at the gathering crowd, younger faces, older faces, each one touched by Elvis's actions. The neon cafe sign flickered, as if winking in approval. They drove off down the highway, windows down, radio off. In the silence, Elvis reached over and squeezed her hand. "Ready to go home?" She nodded, smiling. "Can we stop at the park first? I want to climb the slide." He glanced at her, laughter in his tired eyes. "Let's go." And so they vanished into the afternoon, not as a superstar and his child, but as a man and his daughter, moving quietly through the world they sought to change, in a single moment of everyday courage, echoing far beyond the walls of a dusty little cafe.